Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. Today, we're taking a really close look at something that affects so many families and schools, exceptional student education. It's not just policy on paper. It's about making sure every single student, whether they have a disability or maybe they're gifted, gets the support they actually need to thrive. It's complex stuff, but really, really important. We've got some great sources to help us navigate this. We'll be looking at the official Florida rules for general education intervention and also specific learning disability eligibility. And then we're going to switch gears a bit and explore this really interesting research paper on practice-based evidence in school psychology. So our mission today, first let's unpack the sort of formal procedures, the rules for identifying and supporting exceptional students. Then we'll see how what's happening in the real world in actual schools is shaping and hopefully improving the interventions being used. Okay, let's dive in.
Yeah, and it's good to start with that foundation. The core principle behind all these rules, all these practices, is providing full educational opportunity and a free, appropriate public education, FAPE, as it's known. And that's not just like a legal term. It's this fundamental promise that every eligible student, we're talking ages 3 all the way to 21, gets the education they need. Doesn't matter if they're homeless, a ward of the state, even in a private school in some cases. It's about proactive support, not just finding problems, but actively helping and always trying to do better.
That's a really powerful baseline. So let's build on that. Florida's framework. How does it start? The rules say school districts, they're the ones responsible for making sure students who might have a disability go through these general education interventions first. These aren't small steps, right? They're part of the whole process, identifying, finding, and evaluating students for ESC. ESC meaning basically specialized teaching, tailored help, maybe related services like therapy.
Right. And for K-12 students in public schools, this brings us to something really key. The multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. A lot of people probably know this is RTI, response to intervention. It's like a structured way to give kids help before jumping to formal ESE.
Exactly. It's designed to be a coordinated effort.
And what are the components of these interventions? It seems pretty involved.
It really is. It starts with parent involvement, not just telling parents, but involving them in a data-based problem-solving process. Discussing the data, the student's progress, changing the intervention if needed, planning next steps, and documenting all that communication is vital. Okay, so parents are active partners. What else?
Then you have observations, actually watching the student in the classroom, maybe other settings, to see what the concerns look like in context. Plus, a review of existing data, everything from grades, test scores, attendance, to maybe medical or psychological notes if they exist.
Makes sense. Get the whole picture.
Right. And screenings, too. Basic things like vision and hearing to rule out sensory issues. But the core is using evidence-based interventions. These aren't just random strategies. They're backed by research. They have to be done for long enough, with the right intensity, and crucially, you track the student's progress, often with graphs, and share that with the parents.
So it's very systematic, data-driven.
Very much so. Though it's worth noting, these general interventions aren't usually required for kids suspected of being gifted or those homebound or in the hospital. And, importantly, if there's a really severe issue, cognitive, physical, behavioral, where a student needs intense help now, a team, including the parents, can agree these initial steps aren't appropriate and move faster. There's some flexibility.
That's good to know. And you mentioned something about funding.
Yeah, this is interesting. Districts can use up to 15% of their federal IDA Part B funds for these general education interventions for kids not yet identified for special ed. The idea is to boost early intervention, maybe prevent the need for more intensive services later. It's meant to supplement, not replace, other funds.
And they track that.
They do. They have to report how many students get these early supports and how many eventually move into special education. It helps see if it's working.
Okay, so that's the initial support system. What happens when that's not enough or a different path is needed? Let's talk evaluation and eligibility. The process for an initial evaluation can be started by either a parent or the school district, right? For disabilities, ages 3 to 21, and for gifted, K through 12.
That's right, and there are specific triggers for that. For K-12 students, it might be that the intensive interventions were working, but the student needs more support than general ed can really provide long-term. Or maybe despite good teaching and interventions, the student just isn't making enough progress.
So the data shows something more is needed.
Exactly. Or for preschoolers, maybe a developmental screening raises flags. And of course, if a parent requests an evaluation, especially if they have supporting information, that gets the ball rolling.
And there are timelines involved here, pretty strict ones.
Yes, very important. Once one of those situations occurs, the district generally has 30 days to get parental consent for the evaluation. Maybe longer if everyone agrees in writing, but that's the baseline.
30 days for consent, and then the evaluation itself.
For a suspected disability, it needs to be done within 60 calendar days after getting consent. That excludes major holidays and summer break and allows for some student absences, but it's meant to be prompt.
60 days, okay. And for gifted.
It's a bit longer for gifted, 90 school days. Still, the point is, don't let kids wait unnecessarily long for needed assessments.
Right. Now, about that parental consent for the initial evaluation, how does that work?
It's critical. The district has to give written notice about what they plan to do for the evaluation and get informed consent. And it's really important to stress, consent for evaluation is not consent for services. Those are separate steps, separate consent.
Okay, two distinct permissions needed.
Exactly. The district has to try reasonably hard to get that evaluation consent. But here's a key point. If a parent of a public school kid refuses consent for that initial evaluation for a suspected disability, the district can try mediation or due process to push for it, but they don't have to. If they decide not to pursue it, they haven't failed their child-find duty.
So the parent's refusal holds significant weight there.
It really does. It respects the parent's role while still having mechanisms if the district feels strongly.
Okay, so consent is given. What do the evaluation procedures actually look like? Is it just one big test?
No, definitely not. It has to be a variety of tools and strategies, not just one score. They need to gather functional, developmental, academic info. That includes looking at how the student responded to those earlier interventions, and very importantly, input from the parents.
So multiple sources of information.
Multiple sources.
Yeah.
And the tests themselves have to be non-discriminatory, given in the student's native language if feasible, valid for what they're measuring, and given by trained people. They need to assess the specific areas of concern, not just give a general IQ score. And they have to be careful that the tests measure aptitude or achievement, not, a student's difficulty with speaking or using their hands, unless that's the point.
That makes sense. Tailored and fair.
Right. And comprehensive enough to identify all the student's ESE needs, even if they aren't obviously linked to the suspected disability category. Look at everything: health, vision, hearing, social, emotional, cognitive, academic, communication, motor skills.
Wow, it's thorough.
It has to be. All this data then feeds into the determination of eligibility. This decision is made by a team qualified professionals and the parents as equal members. They look at all that data we just talked about.
And there are safeguards, like a student can't be labeled just because they haven't had good reading instruction.
Exactly. A student isn't eligible for a disability if the main reason is lack of good instruction in reading or math or limited English proficiency, unless they meet the disability criteria otherwise.
But limited English proficiency can't block gifted eligibility.
Correct. That's an important protection. Once eligibility is decided, then comes the plan. An IEP, Individual Educational Plan for students with disabilities, or an EP educational plan for gifted. For the little ones, preschoolers age 3 to 5, sometimes an IFSP, Individual Family Support Plan, is used, which is more family-focused.
Okay, that covers getting into the system. What about ongoing support and checking in? Reevaluations. Reevaluations seem logical. How often do those happen?
They happen if the school, the parent, or the teacher thinks it's needed to see if the student still qualifies or if needs have changed. Can't be more than once a year unless everyone agrees, but they must happen at least every 3 years. Again, unless the team agrees it's not necessary.
And consent is needed for that too.
Yes, informed parental consent is required for reevaluation. Similar to the initial evaluation, if a parent refuses, the district can pursue it via mediation due process, but isn't obligated to.
What about when a student leaves school?
No reevaluation needed then, like for graduation with a standard diploma or aging out at 22. But the school does have to provide a summary of their academic achievement and functional performance with recommendations for their post-school goals, sort of a final roadmap.
Got it. Now, let's circle back to consent, specifically for starting services. You said it's separate from evaluation consent.
Yes, absolutely crucial distinction. Informed consent is needed before the school can start providing initial ESE services. And here's another really significant point about parental rights. If a parent refuses consent for those initial services, the school district cannot use mediation or due process to override that refusal. They can't force the services.
Wow. So the parent has the final say on starting services.
For the initial start, yes. And if the district doesn't provide services because the parent refused consent,
The district isn't violating FAPE and doesn't have to hold IEP meetings for services the parent rejected.
That's powerful. Does that power continue? Can parents change their mind later?
They can. A parent can revoke consent for continued ESC services at any time, but it has to be in writing. If they do that, the school must stop providing the services. Again, no mediation or due process allowed to try and keep them going. The district isn't violating FAPE by stopping.
So parents maintain control throughout. Are there other specific consents needed within the IEP process?
Yes, for certain significant decisions. Consent is required for using state alternate academic standards, sometimes called access points. These are for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Consent is also needed for the related alternate assessments and for placing a student in a separate ES center, like a special school.
Okay, so big placement or curriculum changes need explicit consent.
Right, and the district has to give 10 days written notice before the IEP meeting where these things will be discussed. There are specific forms for this available in different languages too.
What if a parent says no to, say, access points or placement in an ESC center?
If the parent doesn't consent, the district has 10 school days to either come up with a new IEP proposal or request a due process hearing to resolve the disagreement. And during that dispute, the student stays put in their current educational setting. That's the stay put provision.
Okay, that ensures stability while things get sorted out. Now let's zoom in on one specific area, specific learning disabilities, or SLD. How is that defined?
It's defined pretty carefully. It's a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language, spoken or written. This shows up as difficulty with things like listening, thinking, speaking, reading, writing, spelling, or doing math calculations.
So conditions like dyslexia or dyscalculia would fall under SLD.
Yes, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, developmental aphasia, those are listed as conditions that could be involved. But crucially, the definition also clarifies what SLD is not. It's not primarily the result of, say, a visual or hearing impairment, an intellectual disability, an emotional disturbance, or things like limited English proficiency or environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage.
That distinction seems really important for proper identification.
Absolutely, you have to rule out those other potential primary causes.
And how did those general education interventions we talked about earlier play into identifying SLD?
They're central to it, actually. Before determining SLD eligibility, the team has to consider data showing the student received well-delivered scientific research-based instruction and interventions in the regular classroom. Remember that progress monitoring data we discussed, showing repeated measures of achievement, often on a graph? That documentation, showing the student's response to intervention, must be provided to the parents and reviewed by the team.
So you have to show you tried targeted help first and documented how it went.
Exactly. Those RTI MTSS efforts are often the foundation for considering SLD.
What are the specific criteria then for a student to be eligible for SLD services?
There are a few key pieces. First, evidence of SLD. The student isn't achieving adequately for their age or meeting grade level standards in one or more specific areas like basic reading, reading comprehension, math, calculation, written expression, etc., even when they've been getting appropriate instruction.
Okay, so underachievement despite good teaching. What else?
Second, lack of adequate progress. The student isn't making sufficient progress based on how they responded to those scientific research-based interventions we just mentioned. The RTI data shows they're not closing the gap.
Makes sense. And the third part?
Third, the team has to determine that these difficulties are not primarily due to other factors. They have to rule out those exclusions. Again, visual hearing issues, intellectual disability, emotional disturbance, cultural factors, environment, poor attendance, limited English proficiency.
So it's a process of elimination, too, in a way.
In a way, yes. Ensuring the learning disability itself is the primary issue.
Who makes this determination? Is it the same team as for other disabilities?
It's a specific group for SLD. Includes the parents, the student's regular ed teacher, at least one specialist qualified to conduct diagnostic exams like a school psychologist, speech pathologist, or reading specialist, and someone representing the school district's ESE administration.
A multidisciplinary team. And there's an observation requirement.
Yes. The team needs information from classroom observation. This could be from routine observations done before the referral or an observation done by a team member after the referral. The point is to connect what's observed in the classroom, the student's behavior, how they approach tasks with their academic performance. See it in action.
Right. See the challenges in the learning environment. How is all this documented?
The documentation for SLD eligibility is very specific. It has to include the basis for making the determination, tying it back to the criteria. It needs to describe the observed behavior and how it relates to academics, mention any relevant medical findings. Crucially, it must state whether the student has an SLD based on that response to intervention data, confirming three things. One, a performance discrepancy. The student is significantly behind their peers or age grade expectations. Two, an insufficient rate of progress. They aren't catching up despite good interventions or need massive effort just to keep pace. And three, an educational need. They require interventions that are significantly different in intensity or type from what general education offers.
Okay, discrepancy, progress rate, and need.
Yes. And the documentation also has to explicitly state the determination regarding those other factors, confirming the SLD isn't primarily due to, say, cultural differences or lack of English proficiency. It also needs to list the specific interventions tried, how consistently they were implemented, fidelity, how long and often they were used, and the student data collected.
Plus proof parents were kept in the loop.
Absolutely. Documentation that parents were notified about the RTI policies, the interventions used, their child's progress, and their right to request a formal evaluation at any time. And finally, each member of the eligibility team signs the report, though they can add a separate statement if they disagree with the conclusion. Full transparency.
That is incredibly thorough. It paints a clear picture of the careful process involved. So we've really dug into the formal rules, the what and how from the state's perspective. But, policies are one thing. Making them work effectively in real schools with real kids, that's another challenge. And that leads us perfectly into this other piece. We looked at the idea of practice-based evidence, or PBE. It kind of flips the script a little, doesn't it?
It does, in a really interesting way. We're all familiar with evidence-based practice, or EBP, taking interventions proven effective in research studies and applying them in schools. PDE argues that the practitioners themselves, the school psychologists, the teachers, the counselors working in the trenches, can and should actually contribute back to that scientific knowledge base.
So learning from what's actually happening on the ground, not just applying top-down research.
Exactly. It's about bridging that notorious research-to-practice gap. PBE recognizes that traditional research, like randomized controlled trials, while super important, often doesn't capture all the complexities of implementing something in a busy, diverse school. Practice itself becomes a kind of natural laboratory.
Okay, I like that. A natural laboratory. So it's not about ditching research trials.
Not at all. It's about complementing them, creating a partnership. The paper even mentions critiques, like how some aspects of RTI, maybe behavioral consultation, lacked practice-based evidence when done by regular practitioners, not just the researchers who develop it.
Yeah.
PBE fits within that whole scientist-practitioner model, but focuses on the practitioners who want to actively contribute knowledge, not just consume it.
How would that work practically? What does this PBE framework actually involve for someone working in a school?
The paper outlines 5 criteria for credible practice-based evidence. The first one is about systematic evidence searching and adopting EBPs. This actually starts similarly to EBP. Practitioners should frame clear questions using something like the CICO framework client, intervention, comparison, outcome.
Okay, CICO. So who's the client, the student? What intervention are we thinking about? Is there a comparison intervention? And what outcome do we want?
Precisely. A psychologist might search databases like the What Works Clearinghouse for, say, classroom management techniques. They find options, maybe the good behavior game. PBE comes in by studying how the psychologist searches, evaluates the options considering their specific school context and culture, and makes a choice. It examines that clinical decision-making process itself.
So it's also about the process of finding and choosing interventions. What's the second criterion?
Implementation and intervention integrity. This is huge. We know even great interventions only work if they're done correctly with integrity. That's a major hurdle in schools. PBE studies what helps or hinders good implementation in real settings. What obstacles pop up? How can we monitor if it's being done right?
Like if a school tries class-wide peer tutoring, PBE might look at whether the teachers got enough training, if the principal supported it, how communication flowed, things like that.
Exactly. Or unique factors like how high poverty levels or cultural diversity in that specific school impacted the rollout. Practical stuff.
Okay, number 3.
Invoking standards for drawing inferences from intervention effects. Basically, how can we tell if the intervention actually caused the change we see in a real-world setting, not just in a controlled study? This is where adapting things like single-case research designs is useful, even a simple case study approach, like an A-B design where you get a baseline measure A before starting the intervention, B gives you some comparison.
So measure how the student is doing before the help starts, then measure again after.
Right. It strengthens the inference. The paper gives an example of studying a treatment for selective mutism using multiple measures over time. Maybe adding that baseline makes the findings more credible, even from just one student.
Got it. What's the fourth criterion?
Using quality assessments to measure outcomes. We need more than just, I think the student is doing better. PBE emphasizes using systematic, reliable measures to track progress. This helps make informed decisions about modifying the intervention, continuing it, or even spotting negative side effects. Frameworks like outcomes, planning, monitoring, evaluating outcomes, PME, fit well here.
And this ties into RTI's progress monitoring too, right?
Absolutely. RTI systems already do this. The paper highlights a model called MASH-ATTC for treating child anxiety, depression, etc., which uses a clinical dashboard. Imagine a graph showing weekly progress on symptoms, which treatment modules were used, attendance. It allows practitioners and supervisors to see trends quickly and adjust treatment based on real-time data. Very practical.
That dashboard idea sounds really useful. Okay, the fifth and final criterion.
Adopting formal data analysis procedures. How do practitioners make sense of the data they collect in a credible way? Visual analysis, just looking at the graphs of progress, is a key starting point, even endorsed by the What Works Clearinghouse. But PBE also suggests using adapted statistical methods, maybe randomization tests or calculating effect sizes like risk difference or odds ratio, similar to medical research, to quantify the impact of the intervention.
So ways to put numbers on the effect, even in a practice setting.
Exactly. It helps compare the results found in practice with those reported in formal research studies, makes the practice data more scientifically robust.
This PBE framework feels really powerful, like it truly connects the dots between research and the day-to-day reality of schools. So stepping back, what are the bigger implications here? What does this mean for our listeners, parents, educators?
Well, connecting it all, PBE really pushes for a broader way of thinking about how we develop knowledge in education and psychology, especially for tackling those tricky implementation challenges in diverse school settings. It underscores the need for funding mechanisms that actually support these researcher-practitioner partnerships. We need structures that help them work together.
Makes sense. Research grants that value collaboration.
Right. And another big implication is for journals, like school psychology journals. They need to be open to publishing PBE findings, including the studies that show something didn't work or had unexpected negative effects.
Well, that's interesting. Publishing failures is important too.
Hugely important. It stops others from repeating ineffective practices. We learn just as much from what doesn't work. And, on a technical level, developing agreed-upon ways to measure effect sizes in single-case designs would help combine findings from PBE studies with larger group studies. But at the end of the day, PBE is about moving the whole field forward. It helps research get adopted and implemented better because it values the insights from practice. It ensures interventions are better tailored to kids' actual characteristics, their culture, their preferences. It's a feedback loop.
What a fascinating journey we've taken today. From the very specific, detailed Florida rules about ESE identification, interventions, consent, all the way to this dynamic concept of practice-based evidence. It really drives home that the best support for students probably comes from that constant conversation, that loop between formal research and what practitioners are learning every day in schools.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought for listeners to chew on. Think about how understanding both the formal rules and this idea of practice-based evidence empowers you. Whether you're a parent advocating for your child, an educator trying new strategies, or just someone interested in how education improves. Knowing the system and knowing how real-world insights can shape that system gives you a much stronger voice. It helps you ask better questions and contribute to finding what truly works best for all students.
The tools exist, but they have to be put to good use. Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into how policy and practice come together in exceptional student education. We'll see you next time.